Welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast, and on this episode, you are not ready for that bass.
Welcome back to the Region Free Gamers podcast, the podcast that's fluent in gaming. My name's Paul, I'll be your host for today, and today we're going to be talking PlayStation, specifically the hits and misses on Sony's nostalgia box, the PS Mini. But first of all, as always, thanks for listening. And if you enjoy what you hear, tell a friend, and leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcast app, or whichever podcast app you use to listen to us. And hey, while you're on that app, throw your phone in the air and roundhouse kick that subscribe button. Again, get as violent with it as you possibly can. But anyhow, before we move on to the topic at hand, introducing our co-hosts today. To the east of me, out of New York City, we've got Ozzy.
Hey y'all.
And to the south of me, out of Virginia, we've got Arnie.
Hey, everybody.
And even further east of me, Geoff, you're in the Netherlands, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, over in Holland. Yep.
Okay, so we'll pretend I didn't ask, and I'll say, out of the Netherlands, we've got Geoff.
Yeah, hi there. Hi, guys. Hi again.
And we've had Geoff on before, and the last time I introduced him, I was wildly unprofessional, and my introduction consisted of something like, and here's Geoff, and then that was it. So this time, maybe let's do it right. And Geoff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, this is a bit odd. I think I've only ever had to introduce myself at work before. So to introduce myself onto a podcast, I'm thinking, okay, what do I say that's interesting? I'm Geoff. I'm 34. I come from England. I've been a big listener to the podcast since you guys started it. Really impressed with how much you've made it grow. So I'm really honoured to be here. Thank you for the invite. You can tell that I'm from London, so living in the Holland is a bit of fun. Living in the EU, so yeah, having a good time.
It's funny. I probably should have mentioned that you were a British guy out of the Netherlands, because I'm saying out of the Netherlands, here's Geoff, and then this British guy shows up, and first-time listeners will be like, "What is going on here?"
And Geoff, you should also mention that you have an Instagram account that you're probably better known as your alter ego, G-Spot Gaming.
Yeah, that's right. I've been running that now for a year and a half. So yeah. Been a wild 18 months, I can tell you that.
Hey, and Geoff, how did you get into gaming?
Yeah, I was one of those kids that I was lucky I had a dad that just supplied me with MS-DOS packages. Like, he would bring home computers from work. So we'd have like Minesweeper and Solitaire, and then we started bringing home like bootleg copies from his colleagues. And then I got incredibly lucky. My dad used to work abroad, and Japan was his region during the 80s and 90s. So through the 80s, he was bringing back Transformers for my brother. And then at the end of the 80s, he brought home a Game Boy. And it was like, it just blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. So that kind of got me immediately hooked. There's like home videos of me just like glued to the Game Boy whilst everyone else is enjoying Christmas dinner. So yeah, that's where I got my fix, and it never let go. Yeah.
So when you got the Game Boy, was it region free, or were you playing Japanese games more often than not?
Yeah, well, because what my dad would do, he would just basically go to the second-hand shops, buy up a load of loose carts, and then just like once a month, just drop one on me, or like hide them around the house. Sometimes I just find a new Game Boy game, like around my birthdays and stuff. So I played some unbelievably rare games that are now worth, a couple $100. And at the time, they were just games that I just played and threw away, because you never think about the value of this stuff.
No.
But now, like, I'm slowly trying to buy back my old collection, and I've already started to hit like $200 price marks. I'm like, right, I can't do this. So my dad either had an unbelievable eye for like quality games, or he just got lucky. So.
And Geoff, is your dad a gamer as well?
No, he's from that generation where he just like a game is just like cup and ball, so like
stick and wheel.
That's yeah. So yeah, like even my brother didn't take to it. He took to like cars and meeting girls and stuff, whereas I completely adopted video games. So yeah.
Any particular gems from your childhood that you remember that you're still trying to get back?
Yeah, like a Gargoyle's Quest. That was. I mean, I never completed it when I was young, especially because it was in Japanese as well. So like, I had no clue. I didn't really even realize it was an RPG, kind of action RPG, until like when I became an adult. There's a game called Roadster, and Roadster now is at like $200 mark, and it's really simple, top-down racing game. It's really simple, but I think it just was rare. Yeah, so you get this stuff, and you just My dad would basically look at the art on the cart and just kind of go, "This looks cool. My son will like it," and it ends up being like a Japanese RPG, and I'm just like, "What the hell is going on?"
Well, Geoff, let me ask you: Did you ever have to come home with a mahjong game just by accident?
Thankfully not. No. But yeah, now that I look back on it, maybe that would have gone down well on the old 4-hour car rides.
Yeah.
Jeez. Well, I didn't at the time. I got Fist of the North Star, Hokuto no Ken, and it's just now like I'm looking at my shelf now. It's still there, and it's like that's one of the best. It's a terrible game, but the artwork it just kind of like pulls you into Japanese culture, like this sort of stuff. So yeah, major influence on me. That did major.
So Geoff, I suppose that's a big reason why a lot of your games are Japan. I mean, a lot of what you post up is Japan releases. So even something like Donkey Kong Country is the Japanese Donkey Kong Country, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where right now say if you want to buy Super Donkey Kong or Donkey Kong Country, it's so much cheaper to get the Japanese copy still. So it's like I can get a really nice mint, beautiful looking Super Famicom for like $15-$20. Or I buy the PAL version, which always ran at the lower hertz anyway, version for like triple the price. It's like I'm not made of money. I'm just going to go Super Famicom. And then when you go down that road of Super Famicom, you realize, oh my god, this is a never-ending goldmine of incredible stuff. And now
So do you import them? Do you import them from Japan?
Yeah, I get lazy. I use eBay and I use some websites. That's
perfectly fine.
Yeah,
I think Paul and I both use eBay as well.
Oh, dude, almost like I wouldn't say almost exclusively, but I use it quite a bit. I mean, where I live, I'm certainly not finding anything locally. So it's either Facebook groups or eBay. That's like 90% of what I get.
So yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of the Japanese versions, but I do play PlayStation 4. I've got a Switch. I get most of my games that I really heavily play are like, the English versions of games. It's just that thing of like once you open Pandora's box, which is Nintendo Japanese video games, it's a never-ending nightmare for your bank account, but it's just amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you even see people, like, I've seen a bunch of people going over to Japan, and you get into, like, book-offs and hard-offs, and, you can find, like, consoles for, like, $2 and games for 50 cents and, crazy stuff. Like, they just have such a surplus of games that I don't know if the market over there isn't the way it is over here, where Japanese people don't really seem to be that interested in their retro stuff, but with the exception of like the really rare stuff, it's usually not. It's like a lot better to get whatever the Japanese version of that game you're looking for is than either the PAL or the American version.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you get stuff like 100 yen games, which is like not even $1, and they can be like incredibly good games. It's just. Yeah, I do think that they had such an abundance of hardware and of software, and they keep things in such great condition that it just seems like it's just never-ending stuff to be able to get. But I just think that, as you say, I think the retro side for them is not as important as looking forward.
Well, it's interesting, Geoff, because I was in Europe a few months back, and I was in France, and I was surprised at how much more complete in box games there were out there compared to the US. But it seems like there's even more of that in Japan, and that they're not exactly expensive for the most part. But I found that, I mean, if you're buying a complete in box Game Boy Advance game or Super Nintendo game over here, you're paying at least $60, possibly more, most likely more than that. So it's funny that for you're in Europe and you still even look even more east in order to be able to get games even cheaper. I bought actually Astro Boy: The Omega Factor for
that's a great game
from Japan, and because I needed to complete, I had the box but I didn't have the game, and I was surprised at how cheap it was. I mean, in Japan, the shipping was like $2, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense. It's coming from Japan. Why?
No sense at all.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't make absolutely no sense.
Yeah,
but
I was talking to a guy who's based in the US, and he had a few things for sale. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll take that, and that. How much is shipping? He said $25. I'm like, maybe not. I think I'll kind of try my chances, and if I find it in the wild, I'll find it. But I'm not paying a whole new game just to get stuff shipped.
Yeah, without getting into the nitty-gritty of it, Geoff, I mean, do you have issues with, like, import tariffs and stuff like that? I mean, because I know that's an issue for, like, the UK.
Yeah, it's really hit and miss. I recently got that Super Analog, the NT. So that's like, you had to pay $50 for shipping. So total is like $250, and I was like, right, customs are going to absolutely screw me over here. But they didn't even touch it. Yeah, I get a $20 or a $10 item from Japan, and they want 10 euro custom charge. It's like it's just like what they want and when they want it. I just feel like they just kind of make it up as they go along. So,
dude, 100%. Like, I once ordered underwear from the US, and which is ridiculous. But anyway, there was
Canada,
there was a really strong advertising push. And I fell prey to it, and so the underwear was like $15, right? And then it arrives, and my customs bill was also $15.
Oh my god!
And I was like, "What is going on here?" And then on the package, it said $10 for handling. I'm like, "It's a little bag. It weighs like nothing. It's underwear, right?" But nah, man, it's. And then sometimes I get games from the US, and my shipping and handling, or not the shipping rather, but the handling, the customs is $0. It's seemingly random. It's really strange. Anyway, the topic was supposed to be PlayStation today. We've totally gone off the rails here. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the PlayStation Mini, the PlayStation Classic, whatever you want to call it. Like, I've heard so much online about the lineup of games and how much people, like, how, I wouldn't say disappointed, right? Because, I mean, there are a ton of good games on the Classic, but I think everybody's got at least a list of 5 to 10 games that they are adamant should not be on that console. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about the PlayStation. We're going to talk about which games we would take out and then which ones we would put in. And, before we even do that, I mean, the PlayStation was released, what was it? It was 95 in the US. I think it was same thing in Europe as well.
Yeah.
Late 94 in Japan. So, I mean, my math isn't very good, but I think it's like 23 years. But yeah, Geoff, like, what was your first experience with the PlayStation?
Yeah, I had my cousin, even more than me. Like, my cousin had an older brother who was earning money, so that basically he was always supplying him like a pusher with any new consoles. So my cousin comes round. I'm like, hey, do you want to go? Do you want to come play ISS on the SNES? He's like, SNES? Pfft, nah, I've got 32-bit PlayStation. It's like, oh what? A what? PlayStation? I've never heard of it. Never plug it in. And he plugs in Theme Park. And even Theme Park, it was like it looked you look back now, it looks terrible. But then it was
Sure.
FMVs. It's like, oh my god, this is it. This is it. And every like SNES straight down to Electronics Boutique, sold. PlayStation bought. Biggest mistake I ever made. But that PlayStation, it's as soon as you could play CDs, it was like this is something else.
Yeah. I mean, that was the thing, right? Like I feel like every console generation, that's me. It's like, this is it. Like, we've achieved the best. It's never going to be better than this. And then the next thing comes out and it's amazing. So looking back on the PlayStation, it's like, man, this looks like hot garbage. But at the time, it was amazing. Like, I was like, this is it. Like, Cloud's pipe cleaner Popeye arms are as high fidelity as it's ever gonna get.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, looking back on it, it was simultaneously like the biggest leap and yet the shittiest looking.
Oh yeah.
Well, with the PlayStation, it's interesting because for a lot of people, that's where they kind of lost interest in video games because that leap to 3D and having to deal with the camera just was too much for them. And I know, at least I have some friends that they saw, the PlayStation as an abomination, which is that, we had this beautiful sprite art and you just went and perverted all of that with this ridiculous looking polygons.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of people, they saw that as the beginning of the end, whereas it wasn't really, but you clearly see a dividing line, a kind of divergence point with the PlayStation. It really marked... Yeah, go ahead.
This is really interesting. We were talking about Japan earlier. If you go into the book off and the hard offs and these shops in Japan, you will have this gigantic library of 16-bit games that were for the PlayStation. There was this bridge because it's basically the SNES version 2. That's what the PlayStation was meant to be, right? It was meant to be that crossover console. But there's a load of these 1995, 96 games where they still use sprite work. So you've got a lot of the Mega Mans or the Rockmans were put on the PlayStation. You had the Street Fighter Alphas were put onto it where they were still using sprite work. But they didn't, not a lot of those made it over to the West. It's, because when you look back now, you can see this gigantic catalogue and it's like, I've never heard of any of these. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. In the West, we had 3D pushed upon us of like, no, this is the future. This is where it's going. Forget about beautiful sprite art. That's ugly. Now you want 3D. Yeah.
Well, Sony was particularly notorious for that. Like, they were very, very from what I remember, very anti 2D.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't allow 2D in 2D games for the most part. I think that Konami had to make a deal with them in order for Symphony to be on there. So it was notorious. I mean, they really had a policy against doing that because they wanted 3D to be the way of the future. I think they were still concerned with what Nintendo would come out with and having that fear of 2D kind of staying as the mainstream gaming genre or gaming look, I suppose.
Well, I mean, and that's understandable when you think of it. What you're seeing in a Super Nintendo is the peak of 2D sprite work, right? This is an art form that they've been working on for years, and now you have 3D in its infancy. Of course, it's going to look like a dumpster fire next to what has been like a craft that people have honed for years. So I can definitely understand why they're afraid of putting a lot of 2D games on a 3D console. But
I think even then it caught most people by surprise. I mean, the industry was really not ready for the PlayStation being successful. I mean, you had the Saturn kind of scrambling just to make the Saturn, Sega kept scrambling to make the Saturn a 3D capable machine, and they had to basically, graft a new processor into it just to be able to, have 3D. And the Nintendo 64 was delayed, I believe, and they were working, I think, with ATI, or I don't know.
Wasn't it Silicon Graphics?
Silicon Graphics, Silicon Graphics. It wasn't ATI. And they still were not ready, I think. I don't think that the 3D was something that the industry really expected because there were so many failures before that, like the 3DO, the Panasonic CDI, all these other systems that just kind of came and went, and it was not successful. But the PlayStation stayed, and it managed to be successful.
Yeah,
I think that their tagline, "Do not underestimate the power of PlayStation," was marketing genius. They knew that Nintendo and Sega did not even consider them a threat. They knew that they were going to be ignored, so they could basically reinvent what a home console should be or could be. And Sony's marketing was unbelievably relentless, especially when I think about the UK and how they were clearly trying to target the older teenagers and the early 20-year-olds, being in nightclubs and having really gritty marketing campaigns, I guess. You could really see that they completely sideswiped Nintendo and Sega, who thought that gaming should always be for kids.
Yeah, especially in the UK. I mean, you had Wipeout, present everywhere, and there was this big drum and bass and and club music kind of influence to Wipeout, and it even showed up in Hackers, the movie. And you felt like, man, this is a really cool system. I kind of have to have it. Yeah. So the marketing push was really, really brilliant. But again, at the end of the day, it came down to the games. If PlayStation did not have the games, then we wouldn't have been talking about it now. It wouldn't have succeeded. But it really was the games that made it what it is and made it a mainstay of the video game industry.
And the launch lineup was, I don't know how many people remember even what the launch lineup was. That launch lineup was really impressive.
I mean, we look at it now and it doesn't look as impressive, but for the time, it covered almost every phase.
Especially when compared to the Saturn, for example, right? I don't know if you guys remember. Okay, so for me anyway, my first experience with the PlayStation was a buddy of mine who traded in all his 16-bit stuff and he got a PlayStation. I don't even remember why exactly he got it. I think he tried it in the store and was I think he played Warhawk and Ridge Racer and he was blown away. And he's like, well, forget Sega, right? I'm getting this thing. And so he brought it over to my place and I had a bunch of friends over. And we tried Warhawk and Ridge Racer. And let me tell you, Ridge Racer blew Daytona out of the water. Those were the two big racing games at the time. And I was like, holy crap, man, Ridge Racer is the real deal. I just completely wasn't expecting it. And Warhawk was incredible.
It was very impressive, very technically impressive, and it had the FMV cutscenes. I mean, I can't understate how much it felt like this was the future.
Yeah.
It was that, you were going to have, real people playing your characters. I mean, granted, that did not turn out to be the case. We ended up, going really far away from that. But it really felt like, okay, this is what games are meant to go. But you had a really good representation across all genres. You had Battle Arena Toshinden for the 3D games. So if you wanted to see kind of the future of fighters, you had the 3D fighters, with Battle Arena Toshinden and later on with Tekken. I don't know if Tekken came out on release, on launch day. I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
And you had Ridge Racer, you had Air Combat, which was also really good. And it was just a good crosscut of all the various genres and kind of a good representation of, okay, this is the future. Twisted Metal, which felt very edgy, very satirical, and very action-packed. All of those were just good all-around games that, really showed you this is the future. This is what you want to play.
Yeah. None of them had any name brand behind them, but for the time, at that moment, they were virtually all, really good.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. I mean, not surprising, but interesting that there's also no RPGs in the launch lineup, considering that the PlayStation 1 is an RPG machine. At least in my eyes, it's it has such an output of high quality RPGs. Maybe not as big as the PlayStation 2 would be eventually, but I think the PlayStation 1 is where a lot of people's RPG fandom started.
Yeah, I think the RPG kind of movement started with Wild Arms, and then it carried over into Final Fantasy VII and all the greats after that. But I'm here right now looking at my long box games, because those were Sony for the first 2 years. They published the games in this long box cases, kind of like the ones that Saturn used to have, and those are all the early games. And I'm looking at it, and there's not a single RPG in there. So, RPGs did not really kind of hit the PlayStation until 1996.
Yeah.
And then after that was all she wrote. It was just the system to play RPGs on.
Yeah.
And then quickly plus they just take longer to develop, right?
Yeah,
the development cycle for an RPG is just way more.
Especially in 3D.
I suppose they could have just ported some games that were on the Super Nintendo and 2D sprites, but since Sony did not want that, that's probably why it took them longer, because they wanted something a little bit more polished and refined, and that was more forward-looking than the traditional 2D hand-drawn animation.
And Arnie, what about you? What was the first time, or the first thing you remember really about the PlayStation?
Let's see. The first thing I remember about the PlayStation is I played at my cousin got it before I did, because she had like the fat PlayStation 1, and I remember playing Crash Bandicoot and loved it. I was like, what the hell is this? Because at the time, all I had I had a Super Nintendo, and that was like my system that I played all the time. And so seeing like something like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon was like, you know, jaw-dropping for me at the time. But I remember I got a PS1, like the mini PS1 before the mini PS1. That was my system, and I loved it. I loved the form factor of it, and I thought it was super cool and sleek looking. But I remember the two games I got with it were Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which was amazing because I was obsessed with extreme sports and all that stuff as a kid because I was an idiot. And Jet Moto, I think, was the other one. And I love Jet Moto. I think it's the way a lot of people feel about Wipeout is how I feel about Jet Moto. Like, Jet Moto was the for a guy who didn't play racers, Jet Moto was the game that I was like, oh, I like Jet Moto. Like, Jet Moto's a racing game I can get behind. But Tony Hawk was like the reason I got a PlayStation, essentially. Like, I played it over at a friend's house and I needed it, and I put so many hours into that. And I got like all the shitty like Tony Hawk clones. Like, I got Dave Mirra's Freestyle BMX. I got Andy McDonald's skateboarding. I got, you know, I got every single like knockoff you could possibly get. Just to
Freestyle
get
BMX was pretty good, dude.
I like Freestyle BMX. I like that what it did well was the music. It did a lot of like good licensed music like Tony Hawk did. That was the first time I listened to What I Got by Sublime.
It's a great song.
So that was the song that I always remember from that game. But yeah, so for me, the PlayStation 1 was really like sort of racing and extreme sports titles until I got Legend of Dragoon, and that's when I sort of pivoted to more RPG focused stuff.
Yeah, I have a weird sense that we're going to be talking about Legend of Dragoon later on.
That's crazy talk. No, nobody's going to bring that up. How about you, Ozzy? First time?
Well, I mean, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but the PlayStation was my first real system. I asked my dad. I lived in Cuba, as you guys all know, and my dad had left in 1995. He left to the United States. He defected to the United States, and I was, you know, seeing all the different systems that people had. The Nintendo, that's kind of the first system I played and enjoyed, and then the Super Nintendo. When I saw the Super Nintendo and I saw Street Fighter 2, I just felt like I needed to have this. I needed to have one of these systems, and so I never asked anything, you know, to my dad. I was just very shy, and I didn't want to impose upon him, and I didn't know what his circumstances were. Mind you, I was probably like 6, so I was thinking about all those things. But you know, I really wanted one of these, and so I told my mom, like, hey, you know, is it okay if I ask my dad for one of these systems? And so I asked him for a Super Nintendo, and summer of 1996. We come back from a trip over the summer, and there it is waiting for me, a big package. And I say, this is finally it. I'm going to have a Super Nintendo once and for all. And when I open it, it's this weird rectangular thing that played this. And I did not know what the hell it was, but it certainly wasn't a Super Nintendo.
I think the key question is, how long were you crying for?
No, I wasn't. Like, you know, seriously. I mean, I was just happy that I had something, honestly. Okay. But the you know, and so I took like a few hours. My neighbor came to set it up because, you know, having an old TV, an old Sony Trinitron, it didn't have the RGB, not the RGB, the inputs,
the RCA or whatever.
Yeah, the RCA inputs. And so we had to run it through the VCR, and that's how we did it. So it took me like 2 hours. But finally, we were off to the races. I'm playing Street Fighter Alpha and the original Need for Speed. And so, you know, I guess the downside to having a PlayStation was that no one knew what the hell it was. So I really couldn't share my experiences with others. So it was kind of very solitary for me to have the PlayStation. Like, it was very impressive for people because I was literally probably the only kid in Cuba at the time that had a PlayStation. But I really just wanted a Super Nintendo because that's the system that, other people had. But it's a console that is, it's very nostalgic for me because it was literally the first console that I ever had. So, eventually, like within a year, it started failing because it had that notorious overheating issue that would start skipping FMVs and then eventually just stop playing altogether. So, we tried everything. We turned it upside down. I think I was not the only one to do that. And so you had to turn it upside down for it not to overheat. You turned it sideways, everything, until eventually it just didn't play anymore. But, it was a very good experience for me for the time that it lasted. I mean, again, I don't think it lasted 2 years, to be honest, but it was good. And so when I came to the United States, it was 1999, so I got another PlayStation, and that's when I built a little bit more of a library. So yeah, it's a system that is very close to my heart.
That overheating thing, it's like, I didn't own a PlayStation at the time that was happening, so to me, the memories of it are hilarious, right?
We're just laughing at everyone. It's like...
Well, I wasn't laughing at everyone per se. It was more a matter of, I didn't have that level of Schadenfreude yet at the time. But because I had a Saturn, I would often swap with friends, right? Like, I'd borrow a PlayStation and give them my Saturn, and we'd get to play all the different games. And I had a buddy who, and I might have mentioned this to you guys before, he had Final Fantasy Tactics. And when I saw it, I'm like, dude, I gotta borrow this. And he's like, yeah, sure. But my PlayStation's a piece of it's a piece of garbage. And so what I did in order to play Final Fantasy Tactics was I stored the PlayStation in my refrigerator.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, I kid you not. I stored the PlayStation in my refrigerator, and then whenever it was time to play it, I'd take it out of the fridge and then put it upside down on the coffee table. And
that is fucking brilliant.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
and
because
to say
of that.
about this.
What's that?
What did your parents have to say about this?
Well, we had nothing. I don't know.
I have to think that's a fire hazard. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an electrician, but I don't know. That doesn't sound safe at all. So...
No, it doesn't. But in order to play Final Fantasy Tactics, I was willing to do dangerous things. So, yeah, and because of that, I was able to get like an hour of playtime, per session out of it.
Oh, gotcha.
Was that bad?
And yeah, no, it was well worth it. And it added an element of like, I don't know, suspense, because in Final Fantasy Tactics, you can't save during the level. So it's like either you're going to die because the game is hard, or you're going to die because that original PlayStation is such a piece of crap.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, they changed the model like around late 1996, early 1997. They updated it, and it was sturdier. But the damage was done for a lot of consoles. If you bought the console between 1995 and 1996, most likely that console isn't working. It's just how it is. And the thing for me was that, I didn't have access. I couldn't call like tech support or anything like that. I was stuck with it. And so by the time that it started failing, I was so pissed because I couldn't really play it. And so I tried, fruitlessly to trade the PlayStation, and kind of I would show people off, the times that it worked, and it's like, oh, this is really impressive, right? You want to trade your Super Nintendo with me? It never worked. It never worked, and I think the reason why it never worked was actually because of Street Fighter. They were like, I'm not letting go of Street Fighter. But I was really pissed off because it was like I had this console that I couldn't really play. So for a long time, my feelings about PlayStation were just of resentment. Now I can look back at it with a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think it says a lot about the system that all happened and you were resentful, and yet your words before were like, then 1999, when I went to America, I bought another PlayStation. Like, I think it says a lot that something like that could happen to their like the original console they release, and they're still like, they still sold a ton of units, probably because a lot of people rebought the console, and it's still like fondly remembered. Like, up until now, like, I've never heard somebody complain about these PlayStation overheating problems when like thinking back on PS1.
Yeah,
well, Arnie, let's be real. I wasn't gonna buy a Nintendo 64.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm glad that nonsense is not here. I'm glad that Masa's not here because he's a resident fanboy. Because he would have taken me to task for this, but I hated the Nintendo 64, so I wasn't going to buy that crap. But hey, that's my Nintendo bashing for the day.
But this was like a lot in my playground where like the Nintendo 64 kids would go, yeah, your PlayStation, it breaks, it doesn't work. And we'd always turn around and go, what new game do you have? Are you still playing Zelda? Yeah, we got Zelda. Yeah, that came out 2 years ago. I've got like a gigantic library of games. Okay, my console's not the most reliable, but even though like it's not about quantity, it's not quantity over quality, but at the end of the day, like as you say, people always wanted a PlayStation because there was games for everybody. Doesn't matter who you were, there was a game there for you, or a whole genre there for you. And it's not a case of here's one game, Mario Kart. It's like, no, here's 10 incredibly good racing games.
Well, let's consider if this had happened in the age of Twitter and in the age of the online era, would the Sony PlayStation have had the same degree of success? Because this was along the same lines, or perhaps even worse, than the Red Ring of Death for Microsoft.
Yeah, but I think that the difference there is that like Microsoft took a humongous hit on that because they had to do a recall and they offered to replace people's consoles and stuff like that. I don't think Sony did any of that. I think that's
that's because there wasn't as much of a public outcry about it because there wasn't the internet.
That's what I'm saying, because people like for in your case, for example, you had nowhere to turn to like be like, my PlayStation's busted, like how can I get it replaced? So Sony didn't have to deal with that sort of stuff. They just kept pushing product out, and people probably, in order to not lose the stack of games that they had, ended up buying another console at some point.
But if it had happened while there was general internet and communication,
it would have been
Sony
much
would have
harder
had probably an unrecoverable stumble there. So I don't think that they would have had as much success if it had become a mainstream concern and criticism.
Well, I think the old school like marketing proverbs or whatever you want to call them, like if you have a great experience, you tell one person or two people. If you have a bad experience, you'll tell 10. Today, if you have a bad experience, you can tell 1 million people. It's like it's companies now. I think you're right. I think Sony could not have survived if with this level of like failures of consoles. But
and then the other side of that coin is like in the market that Sony was in at the time, you didn't have as many options either, because that your other option would be then I have to go buy a Nintendo 64 and then I have to pay $80 for every cartridge game that I want to play brand new. Whereas with Sony, maybe you have to buy another PlayStation, but PlayStation games were what, $40? Like they were undercutting Nintendo hard. So even if you had to like put up with buying a second console, in the grand scheme of things, I think that people valued the amount of games you could get over necessarily having to plonk down like essentially a ton of money for one cartridge game. Or you could go get a Sega Saturn. I mean,
well, was it not cheaper than the competition? Because I remember that Sony came out with that press conference in 1994, and they just went up and they just announced the price, and it was like $200, and then they just went back down, and everybody just went nuts and raucous about it. So I think even if you had to replace it, it wasn't as expensive as replacing, another competitor console. Yeah, I mean, you weren't talking about a 3DO or any of the other failed systems.
You weren't talking about a Neo Geo. You weren't talking about something like that. But I think the thing now is, if it had happened today, there's a lot more parity in terms of market share and price point. Whereas, like, if your brand new PS4 Pro caught fire with like 6 months that you bought it, you could, arguably turn around and be like, you know what, I'm done with it. I'm going to go over and get a Nintendo Switch, or I'm going to go over and get an Xbox One. And there's not, you're losing out on exclusives, obviously, but in terms of raw numbers of price point, there's not really a change there. You're still paying, $60 for brand new games.
Or performance, for that matter. Like, the PS4 and Xbox One are like, I mean, they're virtually the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think as well, there's also, maybe it's a good question to the group. how many of us, hands on heart, had copied games? Or their PlayStation could play copies.
Dude, that was a huge reason for owning it. Huge.
Exactly. So you've got all these kids who are like, you can get endless amounts of games, and they've always got some dodgy mate whose dad knows someone down the pub. This is really English, I know. But some dodgy bloke at work who basically has like a CD copier at home. And I think that was also a major reason.
Well, Geoff, I think that's a big reason why it succeeded so much in the UK, because the UK, ever since the 80s, with the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore, the Commodore and the Amiga, there was a huge kind of second-hand market and bootleg market, and I think the bootleg market is kind of a part of the UK gaming identity. It's part and parcel. So I think with a Nintendo or Super Nintendo, you couldn't really do that. But with the PlayStation, you could trade around and copied and burned games. I personally didn't have that. I didn't have a modded PS1 or anything like that. But I think it's a big reason why a lot of this console succeeded, to be honest. Which is kind of weird to say that piracy helped the console thrive. That's something that probably a lot of companies are not going to admit to, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, 100%. Like, I mean, if I can get a PlayStation and a whole bunch of burned games, or an N64 and one original game, obviously, I'm going to go with the PlayStation. And even though Sony is making less money on the software because I'm getting bootleg games, Nintendo is making $0 from me.
Yeah.
So, you can do the math there, right?
Yeah, but it is kind of funny because I know Sega had its own issues going on, but the Dreamcast was possibly even easier to copy games for, but that completely crashed and burned. So there are opposite sides of the coin in terms of how easy your console is to open up for the hackers. But I think it's incredibly like vital to the resurgence or the emergence of Sony as a popular home console maker.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I completely forgotten about that. Which is bizarre because, like, my bootleg game library was friggin' gigantic. Like, it's the only reason I was able to play so many PlayStation games, right? But anyhow, we should probably take a break here and then get to our top fives, our games that we want to replace on that mini. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back.
All right.
Hello, citizens of Europe. As spokesperson for SAPS, the Society Against PlayStation, I'd like to talk to you about a menace threatening humanity. It's happening right here, in our very homes, and corrupting the lives of our loved ones. Yes, friends, I'm talking about this. It may look like a harmless bagel toaster, but inside is a deadly donut. How do you know PlayStation is not a normal game system? It carries these telltale signs. Scientists say its effects are mind-boggling. Users lose all sense of reality and enter another world. Here we have a normal, healthy young man. And here we have a fellow who's been experimenting with PlayStation for only a few minutes. Proof that we saps must be on our guard. Remember, do not underestimate the power of PlayStation.
Alrighty, and we're back. And now that we're back, we're going to start talking about what games we want to get rid of on that mini. Geoff, which games do you hate and you desperately want to see removed?
Hate is such a strong word. I don't want to cast any ill will against the programmers or the developers of these fine games.
That's so English of you, man.
I know, right?
But no, there's some utter garbage on this list. So I'm going to first game getting rid of is Battle Arena Toshinden. Do you want to know why, or a little?
Absolutely. I do want to know why.
Because so it probably is a good. My premise is that the PlayStation Mini / Classic should be the 20 games that best represent the highest quality of what that console could deliver. So you're getting rid of Battle Arena Toshinden and you're putting in Soul Blade. So
hey.
I'm sorry, but
that's a good one.
If you want a weapons-based fighter, you go to the very best.
Absolutely, and Battle Arena Toshinden is capable, and it was good for its time, but it's certainly more than mediocre right now.
Exactly.
And it was a very weird inclusion. I know that it's a Sony published games, so they owned the rights, so they didn't have to jump through any licensing issues.
Yeah.
They didn't have to work with Namco for this. But if they already got Tekken 3 with Namco, then why are you not going to go the extra mile and just include Soul Blade?
Exactly.
Particularly considering that Soul Calibur 6 just came out, and it's like, well, do you want to see the first game from that series? Then buy the PlayStation Classic, and you're gonna get to play Soul Blade, which, by the way, it's still very much an excellent game.
Yeah,
I think Soul Calibur improved upon it in many ways, but Soul Blade is still a very, very good game.
Absolutely. And I was looking at like the fighters on here because I love my 2D fighters. I had Street Fighter Alpha 3 is in on the backlist, but I'm thinking, right, you've got Tekken 3 already in there. So I just thought, get rid of Battle Arena, put in another good 3D fighter, and we're good to go. So second game, I'm getting rid of Cool Borders 2.
Yep.
Really, because I quite enjoyed Cool Borders, but it wasn't a series that grabbed me. After that, I was never really, it didn't pull me in to join the rest of the series. Plus, like, apart from SSX Tricky, I've never really truly enjoyed a snowboarding game.
Yeah, that was one that Nintendo... when it came to snowboarding video games, that genre that we all know and love, Nintendo definitely got the upper hand with SSX.
Well, and I think Cool Borders came out at a time where developers did not really know how to handle extreme sports video games, and so for the most part, they just made them into kind of racing kind of games, and they really weren't tricks based. And Cool Borders is not a series that many people have a fondness for. It's a bizarre inclusion. And again, this is another Sony-owned game, so that was probably a big reason why. And there weren't any like licensed borders that they had to work through, like in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, where they had to deal with royalties and the like. But it was just a weird inclusion at all. Why would you include it at all if it hasn't aged well? And if you're going to include Cool Borders, just include Cool Borders 3 or Cool Borders 2001 or something along those lines.
But that's the thing.
It just felt,
Yeah, if you're going to put in Battle Arena Toshinden, put in Battle Arena Toshinden 2. Put in the Battle.
Or even 3.
Or even 3, Cool Borders 2 out, and I'm gonna put in, because I'm doing a bit of a like for like here, because I do like my sports games, so I'm putting in International Track and Field.
Ooh.
Okay.
Interesting pick.
That's a very dark horse pick.
I know, right?
So get the old sock out, put it over your hands, and just get rubbing on those buttons. Yeah. No, but I just found like
dude.
Yeah. No, sorry. Go for it.
No, I was gonna say like the sock is such a good idea because we used to use our T-shirts.
Yeah.
Like the ones we were wearing, you'd put the controller next to your tummy and then, take your T-shirt and just fucking rub those buttons with the T-shirt in order to get the speed. If I had a sock, oh my God, so much sturdier.
Yeah,
that entire clip out of context is what I want.
But I mean, the reason why I want to put it in is because I actually always had a lot of fun with my mates, and even like the older games, even when I was at uni, like we would always pick up like an Olympics-based game, just because it's just you get the beers in, and you just button mash for a half an hour. You completely destroy your thumb, and it's just good fun.
Dude, wildly underrated. Like completely. We used to do the same thing. But we actually didn't, my friends and I, we didn't discover this because we were into the 2D fighting games. We played those almost exclusively and a few other like party games and stuff. But we didn't discover the pure joy of the Olympic button mashing game until the Dreamcast. And I think it was like Decathlon or Decathlete on the Dreamcast. And I had a buddy who was like, yo, we got to play this. And we all laughed at him. And then we played it. And then we all laughed together, and it was fantastic. I'm so glad you picked that. It's a really good pick, Dark Horse, but like I totally agree.
Right. Sorry, number 3. I'm going to remove Jumping Flash. Honestly, it's another one of those, and I may be a bit harsh on the really older games on here, but I don't have particularly fond memories of it playing it. When my cousin brought it over, I just remember thinking like. This controls badly because it's a D-pad control. If I want a platformer, I much preferred like Pandemonium at the time. I thought that was a bit more enjoyable. So Jumping Flash is off, and I would put in Spyro if you're going to have a 3D platformer and you want a game that's right now like on the up in terms of like the Spyro trilogy, I would put Spyro in.
It's hard to argue with that. I mean, Spyro was, I wouldn't call it iconic for the system,
no,
but it really definitely filled an additional, almost mascot, not really, but it was a really good title for that system. I think, I wonder if they didn't include Crash and Spyro just because of
these trilogies.
I believe so. I think so. Yeah. And what I was gonna say, and I'll make this quick argument because you talked about Jumping Flash. I don't have it on my list, but you just reminded me of something. Instead of Spyro, how about Klonoa?
Well, Arnie, it's not your turn.
I know, I don't have that on my list.
You just reminded me.
If you're going to replace Jumping Flash, how about you do Klonoa instead?
No, okay, I'm good.
You could argue with that.
Yeah, good shout.
But I think, let me just talk about Jumping Flash. I mean, Jumping Flash is also another weird inclusion because even though it kind of has its own place in the PlayStation canon, it's a game that is very representative of kind of like the nausea that can be caused by early 3D games. And, and it didn't have the analog support, so it's unwieldy to control and also kind of unsightly and not necessarily... a non-nauseating experience. It's a nauseating experience in a way. So I don't think that if you're looking at it with 20 years hindsight benefit, that this is going to be a game that says, oh, wow, the PlayStation was a great system.
Yeah.
So I think Jumping Flash is probably one of the worst games to represent that, because for us, we can look at it with a kind of a different perspective, but for the general public, they're going to say, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
and no, true. This makes me sick. So I'm not going to play it.
People are going to play it for 30 seconds and go, what was going on here? And just turn it off.
Yeah, and it's a game about a mechanized bunny. It's the epitome of niche, honestly. I don't think that it was a very good choice, even though it has its own, kind of value to it.
Yep. The next one, number 4, Rainbow Six.
Oof.
I can't fathom how that game was even ever possibly on some sort of shortlist. I don't get it. How
it wasn't?
Who put that on? What's happened there?
I think it just kind of like they needed to fill out another game, and they were like, okay, which game can we just throw in there? And that was it. It was Rainbow Six. Ugh. Because to be honest, even back in the day, Rainbow Six received terrible reviews for the PlayStation port. Yeah, because it wasn't good.
No.
I mean, the PC Rainbow Six was, seminal. It was a landmark piece for gaming, but on the PS1, it was notorious for how bad the port was.
Yep. So
I think they just I think they just needed to include an FPS. I think they looked at this list and they're like, we have to include an FPS. They've been popular forever now. We got to pick one. Hey, let's pick Rainbow Six.
Well, did you include Medal of Honor? I mean, that's
really don't get ahead of me.
I'm not arguing in favor of Medal of Honor, but it's better than Rainbow Six. It's better than Rainbow Six for sure. I mean, none of the FPS games on the PlayStation were good.
No,
none
exactly.
Of them. I mean,
I don't know about that. I think Power Slave was pretty good. It's exhumed in the UK.
Was that on the PlayStation?
Power Slave what's that?
Was that on the PlayStation?
Yeah. Power Slave was on PlayStation and Saturn.
Oh, I didn't know.
I'm not sure. I could be wrong. But I know that. You know what? Maybe it wasn't.
Wasn't there a port of Doom on the PlayStation that wasn't terrible?
Yeah, there was, and I'm looking at it, and it's not bad. It's not bad, but it's certainly not a modern FPS.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
No, it's not that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm
so
taking
what would you replace it with, Geoff?
Medal of Honor. This is where it's like, this isn't one of my favorite games. It's not a fantastic FPS, like you said, and I guess my list is, I can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to hit all the different bases of all the different genres. And I can see that they want to put an FPS on, just like you guys said. So I was thinking, right, which type of FPSs are ultimately the most popular? And you're looking at World War II. And Medal of Honor actually had a really good representation, I think, of some of the French resistance that was going on during the Second World War. And it tells a relatively decent narrative or story towards the war without over glorifying it, without it being, here's Normandy beach landing and here's the same old battles you always have to battle and all this sort of stuff. So I just kind of felt like Medal of Honor, it's a decent, it's still a well-known franchise. I think people, if they hear Medal of Honor, it still relates today.
Yep.
And World War II, everyone likes, fighting in World War II. Apart from the people who probably actually fought in World War II. I don't think they enjoyed it.
I mean, and it makes sense, Geoff, when you consider that Battlefield 5 is in World War II. It's another, timely game that you could say, well, we also have a World War II game in the PlayStation Classic. I mean, a Medal of Honor, if you play it today, I think the reason why it probably wasn't included is because the PlayStation Classic does not have the analog support, but you could play Medal of Honor without the analogs. I think that's not an issue at all. But it's just a weird exclusion, and I don't think it would have been difficult at all to get that game on there. I mean, unless Electronic Arts was not keen to license out the game.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
I guess that's the thing is it's very clear from the list that there are some companies who just didn't want to play with them on this, or they just kind of put a bar on a price and Sony just weren't interested. But it honestly
seems like Electronic Arts and Activision were not very keen on any games. I mean, I don't see any representation there for those two companies.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a bigger conversation, but I'm really surprised there isn't an EU or European specific PlayStation list, because we did like very different games to the US. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I mean, I am, but I'm not surprised that there's no FIFA on here or Pro Evolution or something like that. But the thing is, as soon as you put sports games, you run into all the issues with franchise and ownership rights, and you can't have Manchester United on here because you need to then pay them royalties, all sorts of things going on. So anyway, my last one, and this is probably really stems from exactly what I just said. But Twisted Metal, I'm taking that off my list.
Wow.
Maybe it's me, but Twisted Metal just was not a hit over here. I don't think it was ever really well received. It was, in my mind, it was very much seen as like a US game. And it's just like, it just didn't make sense to people over here. And so, like, for me, it's just like, I don't have any sort of affinity with it. You've already got Ridge Racer Type 4, you've got Destruction Derby, which are kind of like, I know Twisted Metal is not neither of those games, but it's still within that world. Twisted Metal, cut.
And if you're going to include a Twisted Metal, you include Twisted Metal 2. I mean, the original Twisted Metal was, a good representation of the PlayStation 1 at the very beginning, but Twisted Metal 2 was the apotheosis of the Twisted Metal franchise on the PS1. So you don't include Twisted Metal 1. I mean, Twisted Metal 1 feels very limited compared to Twisted Metal 2. I mean, again, it's just bizarre decisions because Sony did not have to license any of this. They own it. So why exactly would you not include what is considered the best game in the franchise?
Yeah.
So it's just a mind-boggling decision.
And it's the same thing as Destruction Derby. Destruction Derby 2 is better. Very odd. What's going to go into place of Twisted Metal? So I'm going to stick with another racer that's a bit violent. I'm going to go for Roll Cage.
Oh, wow.
Oh!
Wow.
Dude, great pick.
Mostly because it has it's very English in that it has one of the best soundtracks next to Wipeout. So there is some there's like Fatboy Slim's on there and quite a few other DJs are on there. It's absolutely incredible. And
which is probably the reason why it's not on there.
Yes, exactly.
100%.
It's funny because Roll Cage right now, they just released a spiritual successor. An indie team just released a spiritual successor to Roll Cage, which is, it kind of tells you that this was a game that had a kind of a cult following in a way. So it's a very, I'm impressed with this Dark Horse picks, Geoff. That's that's very
Jeff's
very
bringing
impressive.
it.
Yeah.
So that's my 5 that I think would complement the other 15. I'm just going to do some quick honorary mentions, or shall we let you guys go through yours first?
No,
go for it.
No, let's hit us with those.
Okay, so Final Fantasy IX, Castlevania.
No, of course.
Tombi.
Which one? Castlevania Chronicles?
Oh yeah, no. Well, to be fair, that is a very good game. Symphony of the Night, Tombi, Resident Evil 2, Parasite Eve 2, Tomb Raider, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Crash Bandicoot 3, and International Superstar Soccer Pro Evolution.
All right.
There you go.
I think out of all of those, Pro Evo really should have been on. I mean, obviously Castlevania, right? And we're all going to say Castlevania. We all know that. But, I mean, Pro Evo also kind of eludes the whole licensing thing. Like, all you have to do is license it. So, like, why isn't that on the European released PlayStation Classic? Like, that is a good game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you've already
I'm surprised that you said... Oh, I was just going to say, I'm surprised you picked Parasite Eve 2 and not Parasite Eve 1, considering it was never released in Europe.
Yeah, true. That would have been a nice one, because we got Final Fantasy VI through the Classic, and we never got that. So maybe 1 would be nice just for like a personal... But Parasite Eve 2 was a really good game. Yeah, but that's what I mean. That's what I mean by like I like the European list might have included just some slightly different games if there were no licensing issues. But I'm a major football soccer fan, so I would have loved to have had Pro Evo on there. That would have been incredible.
Yeah, I think that would have been an obvious inclusion personally, but I mean, you know, I don't work for Sony, so there you go. Arnie, your turn, buddy.
So I took a little bit of a different approach than Geoff did, in that the replacements I have, the way I looked at it was, I think that there are some specific genres that are missing from the PlayStation Classic that I think are a shame. So some of my replacements aren't direct replacements, but just things that I thought would improve the console. So starting off with the obvious choice. So first thing I'd remove is Tom Clancy. Like, for sure. Yep. I don't think I would replace it with an FPS, though. I think that there is a lack of shoot-em-ups on the PS Classic, especially looking at the Japan game list. They have about 2 or 3 of them. So I want to put Einhander where Tom Clancy's is. I want to put Einhander there. So Einhander would be my first pick.
That's one of my honorary mentions, so I'm glad that you included it on it, because that is a fantastic, I think the best shmup on the PlayStation, personally. I
think it does a couple things. One, it's an excellent game. Two, not a lot of people have played it, if I'm being honest with myself. And 3, it's very expensive. So to have it on the PlayStation Classic solves my problem of having to buy Einhander eventually. The next one I removed...
And the thing with Einhander is that, again, as you said, it's expensive now. So it would be such a great opportunity for people to experience it, that it's just kind of a failed opportunity. I mean, and they already licensed Final Fantasy VII with Squaresoft, so you know, couldn't you just go the extra mile and just put that in there?
I mean, that's the way I felt about Revelations Persona being on there. Is that, I mean, that's $120 game that, you know, if I was ever going to buy the PlayStation Classic, it'd probably be to play Revelations Persona on it. So I think doing something with Einhander, especially when you don't have any shoot 'em ups on the system to begin with, I think would have been very nice on their end. Next one, Cool Borders 2, and obviously I'm going to replace it with Tony Hawk. I think, you know, obviously there's licensing issues there, but I think the real problem is the music licensing more so than the royalties, because most of these skaters are nowhere near like as famous as they were when this game came out. I don't think you'd be paying a huge amount to license their image to use Tony Hawk's. I think it really is the music licensing that's killing that one. But Tony Hawk's, to me, is the epitome of a sports game, in quotations.
So would you do 1 or 2?
I would go for 1, just because I have more of an attachment to it.
Interesting.
But I think that 2 is arguably the better game.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going to have a sports game on there, if it's not a traditional sports game, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is a must.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, but it's funny, though. I was reading an interview with one of the skaters that was on Pro Skater 1, and I forget his name. Kareem Campbell.
Oh, gotcha.
And he says that he still gets checks every now and then from Tony Hawk.
Oh, wow.
So I suppose that, you know, the skaters could have done with a little bit of money from, you know, putting it on the PS1 Classic.
Yeah. But like I said, I don't think they would demand, like... I don't think it would have been that expensive to license the skaters. The music might be a different story. I don't know what Black Flag is charging up front for their music these days.
But again, I mean, Activision does not have any representation here.
Yeah.
And Activision is not only Tony Hawk, but also Crash and Spyro, because they got the rights to it from Universal after the PS1 era. So it probably was an Activision issue. They probably didn't want to deal with the negotiations on the legal, tangles that you would have to get involved with in order to put it on the system.
Not.
Is skateboarding still in? Because Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 I think was my favorite of that whole series, but we're talking about 16 years ago. Is skateboarding still do you think it would like entice people to get it?
I think it's making a comeback. I think it's kind of like a 20-year itch where the people that grew up with skateboarding are kind of now picking it back up.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, it's kind of making a comeback.
My argument would be, I don't think it'd be the skateboarding necessarily, just the nostalgia of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, just in general, because that was a game that everybody played.
True.
Like everybody that I knew definitely played it, but even people who I know have never skateboarded or never enjoyed skateboarding play Tony Hawk's and have a fondness for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially with the disappointing returns that the Tony Hawk series has had lately. Like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, I heard, was not great. All the spin-off, like Downhill Jam and Ride and, all this stuff have not been doing well, or did not do well when they released. So I think going back to, the original Tony Hawk's would have been nice on the PlayStation.
And let's not forget, I think we might be a little bit naive thinking we're negotiating with the athletes. I can tell you, Tony Hawk will have an agent.
Oh, Tony Hawk will definitely be
a
getting
different
money.
Story.
But like Chad
Tony Hawk
Muska
will probably be like, whatever, I've got loads of money. But
Yeah.
the agent will be like, no. I want to wet my beak here. You guys better pay up.
Yeah. No, I'm talking more about like the other guys, like Chad Muska and like, Bob Burnquist and like all these people. That I'm speaking Martian to you right now. I understand that. But that's exactly my point, is like I'm not talking about like, storied athletes of our generation.
I know. I agree with you. It probably wouldn't take a king's ransom to get what'd you say, Chad Lundquist?
Chad Muska.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So this next one's gonna be a bit controversial, but I think Ozzy will have my back on it. Grand Theft Auto. I take Grand Theft Auto out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Grand Theft Auto's gone, and in its place, I have one that I think Paul will appreciate, because there's also no strategy games on the PS Classic, so Final Fantasy Tactics goes in Grand Theft Auto's place.
I clearly will agree.
Yeah, agree.
I want to see some strategy representation on the PS1. It wasn't I don't think it was a huge genre on it, but I think you want to have a little bit of in my opinion, it's better to be more rounded. And I think Grand Theft Auto doesn't really do anything for anyone. I think people know Grand Theft Auto for Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City and San Andreas and beyond. I don't think people are clamoring to play the original GTA on, the PlayStation 1.
Well, this is coming off the back of our GTA episode, and we talked about it at length there, and they're just not games that have aged well. They weren't games that aged well when they came out. I mean, they were already dated when they came out. I mean, the gameplay systems were revolutionary, in terms of the freedom it allowed you, but the way that it was presented was automatically dated. So it's a mind-boggling decision as to why Grand Theft Auto, the original, was included, other than name recognition. There's just 100%
no
reason why.
name recognition.
Well, I think that's a big difference between this and then the SNES Mini, where, like, say if you play Final Fantasy 15 now, if you go and you enjoy your Final Fantasies, you go back and play Final Fantasy 6, you'll be like, oh yeah, like I can see how it's evolved, but actually this style is still engaging, is still interesting, there's still a great story, and it's playable. This is still a very, very playable game. I think GTA 5, you then jump back to GTA, most people are going to go, what is going on? This isn't the same game. Why can't I go and pick up that hooker and all that sort of? It's like, wait a minute, this is. I think it's moved so far. I think a lot of people will go back to GTA, because GTA was on the edge of being cut from my list as well. Of like, yeah, I think a lot of people would play it after a minute, realize I'm just going to stick GTA 5 on. I don't need to play this.
What would you include then, Arnie?
In GTA's place, Final Fantasy Tactics is the one that I said I put in there.
Yeah, it's weird that they don't have any strategy RPGs in there. It seems like such a missed opportunity, and if you were trying to go for the hardcore gamers, I mean, Final Fantasy Tactics itself, that's at least 100 hours that a gamer will put into that.
I was about to say, and it also gives you a lot of bang for your buck. Like, you're gonna put serious time into Final Fantasy Tactics.
Like that's a game that, you know, makes the entire purchase worth it, because you just get so much bang for your buck.
Yeah. The next one I have on my list is Destruction Derby. Mostly because I never played Destruction Derby. And it just doesn't appeal to me very much. I don't know if there's a big Destruction Derby community that I'm pissing off right now.
Probably.
But so originally I had Castlevania Symphony of the Night on here to replace Destruction Derby. But if I'm being honest with myself and I want to be fair to people, I don't think that a system that was as racer heavy as the PlayStation should just get a single racing entry in Ridge Racer. So I think you would either have to put Gran Turismo or you would have to put Wipeout on there. I would lean more towards Wipeout because I'm not a huge racing fan, especially not simulation racing. But obviously Gran Turismo is like one of the tent poles of the PlayStation 1 era.
Yeah, and Gran Turismo, you get into the same issues there with car licensing. I can't imagine how much of a nightmare that would be. It would not be worth it. I mean, Gran Turismo,
not possible.
I always knew that was not going to be possible. I always knew that there was no way that they could have included that in there.
But it's still, I mean, even the one that came out the other year, it's still by the same developer and it's still published by Sony, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
It is published by Sony, but you had to license all the cars.
The individual cars,
and you had to deal with all the car manufacturers.
Yeah.
But with Gran Turismo, I mean, if licensing was not an issue, it absolutely had to be in there. If licensing was not an issue, because Gran Turismo literally changed the game.
Sure,
there was a clear demarcation point between the arcade racing games of the time and the simulation racers that we now know and that are kind of like the mainstream racing games of its kind. The Forzas and the like. So Gran Turismo is absolutely necessary.
Yeah,
absolutely shocking game at the time. Like, it did to racing games like what Nirvana did to hairbands. In all seriousness, right? Like, when Gran Turismo came along, I was like, well, I can't play another arcade style racing game again. It's not real.
Yeah, and I mean, and you know, I like I said, if you can't get Gran Turismo, I don't understand why you don't immediately pivot to Wipeout. Because I think Wipeout was the other big sort of racer on the console, you know, in a sea of good racing games, obviously, because the PlayStation 1, I feel like, leaned on racing games as a cornerstone of its library for a time. And I think Wipeout is among the top there.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, we have Battle Arena Toshinden. So, taking out Battle Arena Toshinden. Now, what's on my list is Legend of Dragoon. One, because I am an RPG whore and I want more RPGs on this thing. But two, because Legend of Dragoon is a Sony-developed and published game.
Yeah, it's a bizarre mission. It's Sony's big RPG franchise, at least for the PS1. I don't understand. Like, I wasn't expecting it to be on there because I was like, well, it's, you know, it's sort of niche and it's an RPG. I don't know how many RPGs are going to be on this system. But then when I saw Persona on there, I was like, if you're going to put an RPG as niche as Persona on there, even though the series is popular now, it was not when it originally came out on the PlayStation. How are you going to not put what I would consider to be the best RPG that you yourself have developed as a company for this system? Well, and to be honest, I mean, if we could take out a bunch of games out of this thing, I mean, Battle Arena Toshinden, like, for sure, you can take it out. But if it had a better lineup, if the PS1 Classic had a better lineup, then you could take out Wild Arms and just put Legend of Dragoon in there. Because Wild Arms was okay for its time, but but it's not a revolutionary game, and it's not necessarily a game that has aged all that well. Yes. But Legend of Dragoon, with its pre-rendered graphics and, kind of sprawling, CG-heavy presentation, it's still a game that impresses in some ways. So you could, but again, this speaks to how poor the lineup is, that you were taking off 5, but you could still take off like 5 more if you wanted to.
Absolutely, and I will say I do know there are big Wild Arms fans there, and Wild Arms is a storied series. It had about 5-6 main console games, so I know that people still love that game. But if we're talking in a situation where a lot of these games were like, Sony clearly took the easy way out by putting games that they developed or they published on here to avoid paying royalties or paying out to other companies. Why wouldn't you put your RPG on there? It just baffles me. So that's my heart replacement. But if I'm pivoting to replacing Battle Arena Toshinden with a fighter, I was leaning towards Soul Blade because I do think it is the best weapons-based fighter on the platform. But I think Soul Calibur did it better on the Dreamcast. So I would go with Bushido Blade as my eye for eye replacement.
Yeah, great game.
Because I think Bushido Blade, at least for me, is a more interesting concept. Like, I like the frenetic feel of the one-hit kills and the body damage system. I like the way that feels playing against friends.
I think I'm going to disagree with you, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast before. Bushido Blade is one of those games that was a great idea in theory, and we were really excited for it. But in reality, when I played against my friends, there's no clock. Like, the problem with that game is there's no clock.
Yeah.
So we would just turtle. Like, we'd run away. We were always afraid to go at each other because of the one-hit kills. And
you need
need
more aggressive friends, Paul.
Well, we need to not be a bunch of wusses. That's fine.
Or Canadians.
I agree. Yeah. Hey. Oh my God, we're really fulfilling that stereotype.
Yeah.
But the other
we
problem
bought this amazing fighting game, but none of us want to fight each other. Like that. Yeah. You crazy guys.
And the other thing too is that the hit detection in it was awful. Like that hit detection. I just remember us being like, "What just happened? I don't get it." And so between the conceptual kind of almost all it needed was a clock, man. If you have a clock, then I get it. You know, feudal era Japan, when they had duels, there wasn't someone standing there with a timer. That's cool. But, we have to make allowances for making a better game.
Yeah. But that I think if I went with my gut, that would have been the one I would have put instead of Arena Toshinden. As far as
definitely a better inclusion than Toshinden. Yeah. I'll give it that.
As far as honorable mentions, I've got a few. I had to stop myself at some point because I started realizing how sad I was making myself by writing down all these games I wish were on. But there's a few. Silent Hill. If I'm being honest, I think I might have.
I'll talk about it, so maybe we can keep that to our.
Chrono Cross. I know Ozzy is not a fan of that. Vagrant Story, Crash Bash. I think there's no party game on the PlayStation Classic. I think Crash Bash would have been a good inclusion.
Dude, absolutely.
Dino Crisis. I had Parappa the Rapper on here. I understand why that one's not on there. I think the rhythm detection has always been shoddy on Parappa, and putting it on, especially when it's emulated, so putting it on the PlayStation Classic would have probably been a terrible idea. Medieval, Skull Monkeys, Klonoa, obviously, and I think that's about it. Vagrant Story, and then it just becomes like RPG, so then it's like Lunar and Grandia and all this crazy shit. But no, there's a lot. Oh, and before I forget, because nobody's ever going to talk about this, my my secret childhood pick, Monster Rancher 2 on the PlayStation 1. I fucking love Monster Rancher 2. It was one of the games
the only one, man,
that I got as a kid, and I played the shit out of it. I was never any good at it. Like, I would always lose, and my monster would die, never having won anything. But I love playing Monster Rancher 2, so that was my last one.
I happened to notice that you mentioned Vagrant Story twice.
Oh, yes. I apologize.
Because it deserves to be at the top, right?
Absolutely.
All right, guys, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, Ozzy and I are going to make our picks. Alrighty, and we're back. And next, we're going to go to Ozzy. Ozzy, let's hear some picks.
Alright, so I think for the most part, you guys have mentioned all the games that I would take off. I would probably take off, like, honestly, 15 of the games that are on there I would probably take off, or 20. I was extremely...
Not Mr. Driller!
Well, I mean, Mr. Driller is one of the more inspired picks. Yeah. It's one of the more inspired picks out of them all, but that was, for the most part, not what they did. But I was really... It's no secret that I was very underwhelmed. I mean, underwhelmed is kind of a very subtle understatement. I was extremely disappointed with this.
You're such a curmudgeon.
Yeah, I know. I had to fill that role.
It's his original system. He's attached to it. I understand that.
Paul, I've kind of bought into that role. I'm perfectly happy being the heel here. I don't have any issues with that. I will be a curmudgeon for a day. But yeah, I hated this lineup. I thought it was absolute crap. But a lot of the titles you've already talked about it. So I would first take off Rainbow Six because I already mentioned how fucking stupid that inclusion was. I'm sorry, I have to curse for that one. That was just what the hell were you guys smoking? And of course I would include Symphony. And I know that Symphony of the Night is not included because Castlevania Requiem came out, but considering how much Konami botched that release of Castlevania Requiem, considering that it was a port of the PSP release, we really needed Symphony on here. And it was a game that, if you're talking about 2D representation, it's the pinnacle of 2D gaming on not just on the PS1, on almost any system. It's one of the best 2D games, top 3 2D games of all time. And it's such a valuable game in terms of how much gameplay it gives you, because when you realize that you could play the entire game in the upside down castle, it just an entire other game opens up for you. So it's a deep kind of RPG mechanics based game with 2D gameplay. So if you were trying to compete, I mean, and I guess I should mention my kind of criteria for this games. For me, it was kind of like, I'm trying to compete with the SNES Classic. I'm trying to compete with Nintendo. And so you need to have a blow for blow with Nintendo. Yeah. So for Nintendo, you had Super Metroid, you had to have the other part of the Metroidvania. And that's Symphony of the Night. So why would you not include Symphony of the Night? And even now, where you have the Castlevania series kind of coming through and becoming popular, and people really talking about Castlevania and Alucard, Symphony of the Night is such a no-brainer that one of us was going to talk about it sooner or later, but I might as well just include it there. It's the most bizarre omission out of all of them, but again, it's because of Konami most likely. But it's just such a shame.
An unconscionable miss. Like, just throw money at them, include it. Like, it is a seminal game. You have to have it on that system.
Do you think if we got this 2 years ago that we would have Castlevania on here? Considering Konami, I know they
possibly
just because they don't want to like eat up their own sales.
Yeah. Possibly, but I also think that this was an issue probably with Konami. I think Konami was probably one of the publishers that weren't willing to play ball, because I don't see any other Konami representation there.
This is. I
mean, Metal Gear is on there, so there.
Oh yes, Metal Gear is on there.
But I think what I would say is I think that the same thing happened with Activision. What I would say and clearly this all is speculation, but I would think that maybe Sony went to them with the intention of getting Spyro and Crash, and Activision was like, you can have anything else, but these are off the table because we're sort of doing something with them right now. And then Sony was like, well, then we don't want anything. Whereas with Konami, I could see them being like, we'll give you Metal Gear, but Symphony of the Night is not on the table because we're putting out this release. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's most likely what happened, honestly. I mean, Metal Gear they're not doing anything with it now. So Metal Gear Solid 5 and Survive already came out, and I don't think they're doing anything with the first Metal Gear. So there's like, it's no skin off their bones, So
it really baffles me, because you see how well the other two, well, maybe definitely not the Neo Geo Mini, but the two Nintendo Minis have sold. I'm struggling to see completely the whole picture here of, if you could get this mini PlayStation into the hands of millions, potentially, and millions of people who loved the PlayStation, who were like in their 30s, who can happily drop $100 or however much it costs over the, like £80, happily drop that to pick up Gran Turismo 2, because that's exactly what my brother would do. Mm-hmm. Why have these companies not thought, hey, look, we need to keep people interested in our franchises. We need to keep people at least connected to our franchises. Although, people who buy the Mini, they might not buy the Crash, the remake, at least it gets a generation of people playing Crash Bandicoot again. Their kids are playing Crash Bandicoot again, and it's going to want them to pick up the new stuff. I just think that it's, from a marketing perspective and from potential future sales, I would think that this would be a no-brainer of getting your current franchises back into the homes, back onto people's TVs, and get them thinking about your games again. Whether it's Sony's side of being really firm on what they're spending on the licenses, or on the publishers, on the EA side, for example, of kind of going, no, we want to protect our franchises. I'm struggling to see the big picture.
Well, but what's frustrating about this is that a lot of these games are already on the PlayStation Store. They're already on the PlayStation Network, so presumably they've already dealt with the licensing before. But beyond that, I mean, I think it just kind of reinforces the idea that this was a cash-in for Sony. Yes. I don't really think that they put their heart into it. And it was just like, all right, get someone to come up with a list and make sure that it's not too expensive, and let's see how it does. Yeah. Let's see how it goes. I don't think it wasn't like Nintendo, where it was a very curated labor of love. Yeah. At least that's how it felt. When I looked at the SNES Classic lineup, I said almost every single one of those games is a classic. I mean, maybe Kirby Stream Course, you could take it or leave it, but that's about it. Every single one of those games was a classic.
Yeah, and I will say, not to derail your list, Ozzy, but I think that what you said is very true when you said this list is garbage. I don't necessarily think it's as bad as I originally thought it was, but I think that it shows a lot that Sony, when they announced this thing, only announced 5 of the games on it, because I think they weren't confident in the list either. So I think that always rubbed me the wrong way, that they announced sort of these 5 big games that are coming on it, got a whole bunch of pre-orders, and then once the deadline was a little bit closer, they're like, here's the full list. And
they probably were still negotiating their licenses. They probably were still negotiating the final list as well.
I could see that, but I think if that's the case, then I think you wait a little bit longer to release the entire list. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I think we're seeing it a lot with a lot of people canceling their pre-order, but I think there's a lot of people that also just aren't going to think about it. They already plopped down the $100 and they're like, oh, well, I'll just get it when it comes out. So I think it says a lot about the fact that Sony was not willing to release, if not every game, then every game they had negotiated up to that point when they originally announced this thing.
Okay, so for my next one, take off Cool Borders 2. We've already talked about that at length. And I would insert Crash Team Racing, because the reality is that if you have the SNES Classic, you have Mario Kart, and why not include the only other kart racer that has been considered, that and Diddy Kong Racing has been considered kind of a worthy competitor to the Mario Kart franchise. And if you want to have a party game, Crash Team Racing is it. Yeah. So I would include that.
Yeah, great pick.
So for next one, I would take out Destruction Derby. I think that Destruction Derby is fine and all. I think it's a good game, but I don't really think it fills any particular role here. It's not a game that people look back fondly on, as Arnie may have mentioned. I mean, there probably are some Destruction Derby fans, but I don't think that there are many that look back fondly upon that game. And I would insert another Psygnosis game, and that's Wipeout XL. And again, we've gone over the licensing issues, but You could include the original Wipeout, but the original Wipeout is tough as nails. It's so brutal. Yeah. If you go back to it, you will stop playing it within 5 minutes because you're going to realize that you're terrible at it. But Wipeout XL, the difficulty was a little bit more balanced. It had more tracks. It just felt a lot more polished. So that was a sequel. But you could go either Wipeout XL or Wipeout 3. Either of those two are good choices. And also, they're games that would be a huge hit in Europe, because maybe they weren't the case in North America. They weren't as big of a hit, but in Europe the Wipeout franchise was absolutely massive, particularly considering that the Omega collection came out recently. It's a great opportunity to include a game like Wipeout in there, and it feels that futuristic racing role that Geoff would have filled it with Roll Cage. I think Wipeout XL would be it. So I think that not including it was a huge miss.
It's really crazy when you look at some of the games that basically, like we were saying earlier, they made the PlayStation. That's what made it stand out above all the others. Well, all the other three at the time. But this is what kind of put it above in some categories. And if you think you're going to put out a console that's going to celebrate the best of what that console gave people at that time, it is very strange that Wipeout's not on it, because I would have thought that'd be a very easy game to get the license for, considering they basically were in bed with Sony through the 90s. You know this.
Well, and I'm also wondering now. We talk a lot about music licensing and the like, and that's probably a big reason why Wipeout wasn't on there, but you also have to realize that a lot of this music was actually owned by Sony. So Sony has a big music publishing arm. It's one of the biggest. So maybe when we talk about the difficulties, it's not really a big issue at all. It's just they didn't want to go through the headaches of it.
That's
I'm
true.
having to go with another Sony division.
But I've never worked for a Japanese company, but what I do here is that they are very much a case of this is your box and you work within it. Don't worry about what the other division are doing. This is what you need to do. So I can imagine like Sony Entertainment or the PlayStation division never ever talks to Sony Records. Like
it's very possible.
Yeah. Sadly, a better podcast would have done some research on this and known the answers beforehand. But here we are.
No, but I don't even think
special guest.
I don't even think that this is something that would be known, even if we researched it. I mean,
I know, I'm kidding, of course.
Unless we have someone, inside PlayStation, and we're kind of finding a scoop here. But I don't think it's really been disclosed as to the reasons why some of these were not included. But I don't know. I think Wipeout is a great franchise. It's one that, for the last decade, Sony has treated very poorly at times. I mean, they did close Sony Liverpool, which used to be Psygnosis, and that was a big shame. But I think Wipeout is really something that is emblematic of PlayStation, so you absolutely needed to have it in there.
Yeah.
But going on to the next one, I would take off Battle Arena to Shinden. Again, we've talked about this and the reasons why. And I would include Street Fighter Alpha 3. And the reason for that is, again, using my criteria of competing with the SNES. If you have Street Fighter 2 Hyper Turbo Fighting, whatever the one they included there. Yes, if you have it on the SNES, then you need a good 2D fighter representation, and there aren't any 2D fighters on the classic lineup. Yeah. So Alpha 3 has a huge roster, just an absolutely massive roster, and it's one of the best Street Fighter games. I think it's up there. It's Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 3, and Street Fighter Alpha 3. Those are, I would say, probably the best classic Street Fighter games. So Alpha 3 is just such a good representation, and I think Capcom was willing to play ball, so why wouldn't they include Alpha 3? And I think that's also pertains to the fact that the Street Fighter collection came out recently, and maybe Capcom didn't want the classic biting into their market share perhaps, but I mean, it's a huge miss.
I completely agree with Street Fighter Alpha 3. That was one of the ones I was considering for a while. I think that Sony is sort of trying to distance itself from the 2D fighters in the same way that they're trying to see, like, the PlayStation 1 was the 3D machine. Here's the birth of, like, 3D fighters, like, being popularized. But bringing up Street Fighter Alpha 3 also sort of reminded me of a game that I didn't really talk about, didn't really think of, is Marvel vs. Capcom.
But that one would have been a nightmare.
Absolutely. It would never be on there. But I'm just saying, like, that was another really big 2D fighter for the PS1 that, sort of escaped my mind up until now.
Yeah, I mean that means you would have to deal with Disney now. I mean, and we know about the fact that Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has been pulled from like digital storefronts and the like because the licenses have expired. So that would have been impossible to get, honestly.
But a man can dream, Ozzy.
A man can dream. A man can dream. And so let me carry over into the last pick before I go into some honorary mentions. I will take off Grand Theft Auto. And I think, as we have mentioned, it's not a game that has aged well at all, and there's no reason to include it there. And I would insert another M-rated game, and that's Silent Hill. And I think that, another Konami franchise, and to me, it's kind of the perfect representation about how PlayStation really did mature storytelling, and how it managed to create genres that were not really prevalent before, and that was the psychological horror thriller. And Silent Hill is a game that to this day you could play and still have a very terrifying experience. So the fact that it's not there, we do have Resident Evil, but I consider Resident Evil and Silent Hill to be two worlds apart. They're still part of the same genre in a way, but they're very much a different breed of survival horror. Silent Hill is much more psychological in scope. So I think, it's unfortunate that it wasn't there because a lot of people were probably expecting that one. And I don't know the reasons why. Probably Konami being a pain. But, and the fact that they treat Silent Hill like the redheaded stepchild. But, it's unfortunate that it's not there. I really miss that not being on the Classic.
Yeah. No, it's 100%. It should be there. I agree with everything you said, Ozzy, and I don't even know why I'm talking. I have nothing to add. Like, you hit it perfectly.
Yeah, well, I guess...
and you could get some of those PT people who were pissed off that game never came out and be like, well, come back and play the original Silent Hill.
Well maybe that's Konami, because they, treated PT like crap. That's probably why they didn't want to include Silent Hill. They're still holding a Japanese grudge against Silent Hill. So I don't know what the hell's going on in that company anymore. It breaks my heart every time I think about it, because they used to be my favorite company because they put out so much quality content. But
I'll mention as well, Ozzy, in the lead up to this episode, because originally you weren't going to be available, and I was chatting with one of our Instagram friends, Louise Hines, and eventually she wasn't able to make it, but she said, listen, I'm not able to make it, but please, I want you to ask one question. And then she wrote in capital letters, where the fuck is Silent Hill?
Yeah, she's right. She's absolutely right. But in any case, let me go through some honorary mentions and maybe we could spark a little bit of conversation with them. Very, very dark horse pick, In the Hunt. I think In the Hunt would be a terrific inclusion because...
That is a black stallion of a pick.
Absolutely.
A dark horse.
But listen, if you're going to include Intelligent Cube and Mr. Driller, why not include In the Hunt? It's a predecessor to Metal Slug. And it's a super impressive game graphically in terms of 2D graphics. And very fun, extremely tough as nails, but very, very fun. And just fast-paced action. So I think it's a very good game to include because it has aged so well, all things considered, because the gameplay is so timeless. So In the Hunt is probably one that, maybe I wouldn't include, but it's an honorary mention that you could include in there, and I wouldn't be pissed off about it as I am with all the other 15 games on there. And Suikoden too. Talking about Konami. I mean, another game that's super expensive, and if you included it in there, I think that would justify the purchase price for a lot of people.
I agree.
It's supposed to be the best game in that series. I personally have only played the first 5 hours. I played through Suikoden 1 and I loved it. But Suikoden 2, I mean, it would have made the purchase worth it just by having that one in there. And it's a very mature storytelling. The storyline is supposed to be fantastic. And again, another game that has aged well because there's so beautiful sprite work. And it's very expensive.
And that is one that, if I'm being honest, you could probably put in place of Persona. They just picked another expensive PS1 niche RPG, but Suikoden 2 would be a much better fit for that lineup.
Yeah, I mean, and another one, if I had to include another RPG, which I would love, would be Xenogears. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 came out recently, and in that game, it was revealed that all the Xeno games are connected, which we kind of all imagine, but it was confirmed in that game. And recently Square Enix released a celebration of Xenogears because it's a 20-year release. So I think that the Square would have been very keen on including something Xenogears related. So I think to not have that is a big miss. And it's a game that, it's a game that's very polarizing. It's not a game that I have beaten because it's such a rough around the edges title. But it has beautiful anime cutscenes. It has, to me, Yasunori Mitsuda's best soundtrack work of all time. Absolutely his best, even compared to Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross. And it's a cool game because it has mechs and it has martial arts. It has this, Jungian psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freudian psychoanalysis and religious imagery. It's such a bizarre game that it's just a weird game that just every gamer should experience at the very least. Just another two to round it out. Harvest Moon: Back to Nature. Just because you need a crack cocaine game in there, which it is. I mean, you include this game and literally you will have people addicted for months and months and months. Particularly considering that something like Stardew Valley is so popular right now. Just include Harvest Moon in there. I lost so many hours, days, weeks of my life to this game that I think that it really plays well to like the female demographic, not to like stereotype, but Harvest Moon is big with the female players, so why not cater to that a little bit? I mean, I'm a male player and I absolutely love it, so why not? So, and another last one, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. I wouldn't include I wouldn't include Tomb Raider because Tomb Raider aged like crap, but Soul Reaver I think has aged well, and it's a very cool storyline. It's a very edgy storyline, and it kind of really shows off how PlayStation did franchises that were catered to a more adult-oriented demographic. And I think it's a game that has aged very well, and it has great voice acting, and a very cool gothic atmosphere. So I would definitely, mention Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver.
Yeah. Can I get a quick opinion on a game that I'm surprised you did not talk about?
Okay, go ahead.
Darkstalkers.
Oh, I would love Darkstalkers, but I put Street Fighter Alpha 3 in there, so I wouldn't have included Darkstalkers just because of that. But Darkstalkers 3 would have been an absolutely great choice if they had to include it.
Yeah.
I don't have any issues at all with including Darkstalkers.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess we'll get to mine, eh?
Yeah.
In listening to all your guys' picks, I'm very happy. Mine are quite different.
Ooh.
And not because I was trying to be different. I mean, I don't know. I guess I was. I don't know.
You're just contrarian.
This is the list. I mean, I agreed with a couple of the universal removals.
Yeah.
But I've got some other removals here that you guys might not see coming.
So you're removing Final Fantasy VII.
That is incorrect. That is an unconscionable thing to do. Like Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid are the only non-negotiables there.
So this is sorry, Paul, to interrupt before you go into your list, but there is like a caveat I have against some of these games, like Metal Gear Solid. Why haven't they just put Metal Gear Solid Integral or the one with the VR missions? Because then you've got all the VR missions. With
that's
Final
a good
Fantasy,
point, Geoff.
With Final Fantasy VII, yet critically acclaimed. But arguably, Final Fantasy IX is better.
No, but Final Fantasy VII has to be in there.
I know.
I
know. Some people will be like 7. No, 7's just everyone loves it because it's mainstream. 9 is where is the real Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
You know how people are.
So I was at EB Games the other day, right?
Oh,
and the two guys behind the counter, these poor guys, I felt for them. They had this like uber nerd standing in front of them, and he was just kind of hanging out. and talking about video games with them in a manner that like you could see they just wanted to kill themselves, right? and so Uber Nerd was like, I don't understand what the big deal about Final Fantasy VII is. Final Fantasy IX was the better game, and he was like going on about Final Fantasy IX, and I was standing there in the Nintendo Switch section, and I'm like, I had to like really, really reel myself in, because like if I'd fallen into that black hole of conversation, I would never have left. But like, not to call you an Uber nerd, Geoff, that's not where I'm going with this, but like, I get it. Final Fantasy IX is technically like the better game, but Final Fantasy VII is Final Fantasy VII.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I think
Final Fantasy VII has fallen victim to its hype, and the fact that it's so universally beloved, and so people have just had to, hit back against it. But Final Fantasy VII is still a terrific game, and it's one of the best games, not only in the franchise but of all time. I'm usually the curmudgeon here, and I can tell you that Final Fantasy VII is still a very, very, very excellent game.
And I think more than anything, Final Fantasy VII is so integrally tied to the PlayStation, like what the PlayStation is, what it became, how it rose to dominance. It's the
game that made RPGs popular.
Yes,
I mean that's what it comes down to.
Yeah,
and you can just rest your hat on that.
I thought it was their best system seller, personally.
Yeah. I mean, I think without Final Fantasy VII, Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, those were games that made it, a hit, but Final Fantasy VII really made it a hit. That's the moment where, Nintendo probably realized, oh, okay, we're losing this war.
Well, and it was also the first Final Fantasy game not on a Nintendo console, correct?
Correct.
It was it was Square Enix's sort of lashing back at Nintendo and being like, we're done and we're out of here. And it's just like there's so much impact and so much history that's tied into that game that I think to not include it would have been unfortunate.
I'm surprised Geoff was even rude enough to interrupt me with this silly argument for Final Fantasy IX, quite frankly.
No, well, all I wanted to put into the debate was that Final Fantasy VII is my favourite PlayStation game, hands down. But 9 is an exceptional RPG.
Yes.
It is.
It has furries.
Yeah. But yeah, I've been stuck in game stores where customers and employees are arguing about which Final Fantasy comes in which order of brilliance. And you're just like, it's amazing what Final Fantasy does to people.
Yeah.
Okay, so Geoff, here's the question: Do you walk into those conversations and then start trolling by saying 8 is the best?
Well, I normally just start off with 13 when I do start. So.
Oh man, in retrospect, I wish I'd done that. But
listen, it's all about Mystic Quest. I don't know what any of you guys are talking about with all this garbage.
Mystic Quest. All right, anyway. We're running out of time here, so I'm gonna go over mine, I guess, fairly quickly. I would take out Wild Arms first of all.
Ooh.
Because you hate Wild Arms.
Because I hate Wild Arms. That's really the bottom line. Like, I thought it was just a really derivative RPG that lacked imagination, and I realized that there are a lot of Wild Arms fans out there, and they probably want to kill me. That's cool. I live really far away. We're all good. I would replace it with Final Fantasy Tactics because, as Arnie said, no strategy RPG representation on the Mini, and you have the best one right there. Like, to this day, Final Fantasy Tactics might be the best representation of that genre, and it came out like 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a pretty easy inclusion. Shout out to Legend of Dragoon. Also would have been a really worthy replacement, I think, for Wild Arms. And it's for all the reasons that you guys already mentioned. We don't really need to get into it.
Yeah.
I would have 100% taken out Siphon Filter.
Oh, yeah.
That was one that I never played when I was younger. So I was always wondering, like, was Siphon Filter, like, a series that people liked?
I mean, they liked them, but
But Siphon Filter was a low-rent Metal Gear Solid.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is what it was.
But even back in the day, Paul, I looked at Siphon Filter, and I remember it being 1999, 2000, and I looked at it, and I played it, and I said, this controls like crap, and it looks like crap. I don't want to play this.
Oh, by the way, it sounds like crap.
Yep.
Like, I don't know if you remember. Okay, so after Metal Gear Solid, like, you were not allowed to have bad voice acting anymore.
No.
Period.
No.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, Metal Gear set the standard, and if your game did not sound as good as Metal Gear, then you laughed at it.
Yeah, and it was a generic spy story as well. So
dude.
There were almost like nowadays there are no redeeming qualities about that, and it speaks to the testament of how shitty this lineup is that we didn't even talk about Siphon Filter until now, and that we would have taken it off. So there you go.
Well, you need about a 5-hour podcast to go through this list because, like, looks like crap, plays like crap, sounds like crap is pretty much the tagline for this whole list. Apart from one or two mentions, it's yeah, wow. I can't stop looking at it.
Man, I'm so glad I was able to like shovel coal into this hate engine. You know?
So which one do you insert, Paul?
For Siphon Filter, look, I can see where they're going with it. The stealth games were really big at the time, but you already have Metal Gear Solid there. Let's go similar game but different direction and put Tenchu in there.
Ooh, I knew you were going there.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Brilliant game.
I like that pick.
Yeah, absolutely. Really I mean, it's a hard game. It's a hard game. I mean, much harder than Metal Gear, but it's a very solid pick, and it has ninjas.
Exactly.
Like, that's it. That's an automatic win.
Oh, dude, I didn't even think of that part. Yeah, it has ninjas. Like,
there are no ninjas on the PlayStation Classic.
And again, particularly because Sekiro is coming out, which is kind of a spiritual successor to Tenchu. Like, why does this not make sense? But again, that's another Activision game, so maybe Activision was not willing to play ball.
But
maybe.
Is this Tenchu 1 or Tenchu 2
like,
you want to put on?
You know what, man? I debated it because, look, like I understand where you're coming from, Geoff, where you want the PS Mini to be the cream of the crop for each game, each genre. I see it more as sort of like a museum. So games like Jumping Flash, I'm cool with. Yeah. I'm cool with Battle Arena Toshinden because that was the first one.
But I would be more than happy if they said, here's like the classic launch titles, and then here's all the really cool stuff that everyone wants to play.
Hey man, I'm not arguing with you on that because I actually, like, as a consumer, if I'm purchasing it, I would want the best games, but I also see the value of it as kind of like a museum.
Yeah.
You know, you could go either way.
Kind of like
but this is just kind of the way I'm approaching it. So, in that sense, Tenchu 2, obvious pick, like better version of Tenchu, but playing Tenchu for the first time was an experience. Like, my friends and I loved that game. We were like, wow, this is really fresh, really interesting, and in sort of the museum-y spirit of the PS Mini. In my mind, I would put Tenchu in there over Tenchu 2.
Cool.
The next game I'd remove, we've got a lot of puzzle games on this system.
How dare you?
I don't really know why. Sorry, Arnie, but like 3 puzzle games I think is a little bit too much. I think Intelligent Cube was a really inspired choice. I love, personally, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. I think it's possibly the best versus puzzle game ever, which sadly leaves poor Mr. Driller on my cutting room floor.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I know. It's a good game. But
I'd rather Mr. Driller than Intelligent Cube.
Yeah, I think Mr. Driller, unfortunately, is the bottom of those 3, at least for me. I think Ozzy might disagree with me, but... So yeah, I'd take out Mr. Driller because we've got too many puzzle games there that nobody cares about. I would have said Castlevania, but that's kind of already been said and is a really obvious pick. So in the spirit of keeping Battle Arena Toshinden as your museum piece, I would also include a 2D fighter. But here's the thing. Street Fighter and its various iterations have been released everywhere, on every platform, on every console.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Ooh, maybe you do. The game that hasn't been released and is really a pioneer is Guilty Gear.
Ooh, I did not know where you were going with that. I thought you were going to say King of Fighters.
No, King of Fighters. Here's the thing. I didn't want to include any 2D fighter that was released on the Saturn.
Gotcha.
Because the Saturn did them all better.
Yeah.
Right? No, it's true. Like, it just did. So let's not even
Guilty Gear is a really left field inclusion there, man. And you're right. It hasn't been released anywhere. The first Guilty Gear has been forgotten, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let me tell you, man, Guilty Gear at the time was, I thought, revolutionary. Like, it had this kick-ass soundtrack that we all loved. Mm-hmm. The fighting system was fast and fresh. The artwork was super original.
Yeah.
Like, it was a heck of a game at the time. And they're still releasing Guilty Gear games today.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that Guilty Gear is like always been pushing, right? Is that super detailed art style where all these characters are like, you know, animated so amazingly and like are such like complex designs that like flow very well when they fight.
Yeah. And let me tell you, Arc System Works, they worked miracles on that PlayStation hardware, because that game looked as good as any Saturn 2D fighter. Mm-hmm. Like, we were shocked at how good it looked on the PlayStation, which was not a 2D machine, right?
No, it didn't do 2D well at all.
Yeah.
No, but Guilty Gear was definitely the exception. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. That game looked really good, and I don't know, I loved it back in the day.
Inspired choice, Paul. I approve.
Awesome, thank you. Makes me feel good, actually. I would take out GTA for all the reasons we mentioned. Like, let's be honest, Grand Theft Auto starts with Grand Theft Auto 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how it is. I would probably, in the vein of having like a GTA-style game, I'd replace it with Driver.
Oh, nice.
That's a good pick. I mean, yeah. I wouldn't go against that. But please tell me your reasons why.
The reasons are basically what I mentioned, Ozzy. It's kind of like GTA, but it's in 3D. When I say it's kind of like GTA, it's really not. But I just thought it was a really fresh take on kind of the racing genre at the time. I really enjoyed it. And,
I really enjoyed it as well. I mean, the question is whether people now would be able to pass the training mission.
That is exactly what I was thinking.
I mean, because I tried to pass it and I couldn't. So, and I promptly put it down afterwards. So,
you know what? Hey, man, that's a good point. And truth be told, like, if I was going to take out GTA and I had the pick of anything, it would be Gran Turismo 2.
Yeah.
But knowing that that's an impossibility, I think Driver's a pretty good choice.
Yeah, I think it did really well, Driver. I think it sold really well over here.
And it did very well in the UK as well.
I think it was it a UK-based game, I think? Trying to think.
I think it was.
Yeah, Reflections was, I think, a Liverpool developer. But it took place in Chicago and Miami. So it didn't take place in the UK, but it was done by British developers.
I don't know what it is. We seem to be really good at depicting US life. I don't know, like Rockstar, maybe they just employ all Americans, but Rockstar up in Scotland, yeah.
Yeah, some US envy going on there, Geoff. The fact that you lost that colony so many years back.
Well, yeah. Well, Trump is Scottish, right? So there is that
connection. Lastly, like you guys, I take out Cool Borders 2. I just don't see where the love is for that game. And of course I would replace it with Tony Hawk, right?
Yeah.
But I know that that's also an impossibility. And it's funny, I heard you guys like sort of poop on it earlier. I'd put Parappa the Rapper in there.
Ooh.
My only thing with Parappa is that I've heard that emulation wise,
same.
Like the button inputs don't respond very well to like doing the rhythm parts. So it's been like like even on the PS4 release they did, like the inputs weren't amazing. So that one's sort of up in the air for me.
See, this is my dream list though, right? Like
yeah.
This is Parappa as if it plays well. Yeah. And I thought Parappa was one of those games that kind of differentiated Sony from everyone else.
Oh yeah.
Nobody else had that kind of game. And it birthed the genre.
And it was huge in the UK, and if you were going to have some type of music representation, then that would certainly be it.
Well, I think the artist was English. Sorry.
Was it? Because I think it was done by a Japanese developer.
Yeah, but I think it was Nana Onsha was the developer, but I think the rapper was an American guy.
Perhaps.
Anyway.
But I think if you played Parappa, then you absolutely remember kick, punch, soul in the mind. You know, so it's a game that kind of stayed in your memory. So it's a very nostalgic game for a lot of people. So, but I think input lag is a big issue. So,
and I think you could. I mean, honestly, you could also. Obviously, nobody would know what the fuck it is, but you could also go with the sequel, Jammer Lammy.
You could
also on the PS1, but nobody would know what that is.
No, whoa. That's my favorite rhythm game, Jammer Lammy. I thought it was bonkers, but brilliant.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like it's good, and the people who know about it like it, but everybody else would probably be like, "What the fuck?
What the hell?" Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I liked it too. I actually have it still, but I think Parappa is kind of the birth of that whole thing.
But it's like him and Crash. They were all these mascots, and like Parappa was, he was a big mascot for the PlayStation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, those are my 5 picks and replacements. Some honorable mentions. I'll just list them here.
Yeah.
Vagrant Story, because you guys know me well enough by now. Castlevania, because of course. Silent Hill, because of course. Einhander. I kind of flipped between a shoot 'em up if I was going to pick Einhander or Thunder Force 5. I guess it's got to be Einhander. But I could take or leave either of them. And finally, Klonoa. Klonoa's, I don't know, man. I think that's a pretty good inclusion. I'm surprised it wasn't there, frankly.
Yeah. And again, Namco clearly willing to play ball. Don't know why Klonoa's not on there. One game that nobody mentioned, and I don't know if it's because it's just not as popular, but Mega Man Legends and Legends 2? Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
I mean, Capcom was willing to play ball. And Misadventures of
Tron
Bon,
right? Yeah, because like that's super pricey now, so why not throw Tron Bon on there, right?
Let's throw another fighter in there. How about Bloody Roar?
Oof.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there would be too many fighters, but anything is better than Battle Arena to Shinden at this point. Yeah, I don't know.
What were you going to say,
so anyway,
Geoff?
those are my picks. And yeah, we're starting to run low on time here, guys. Anything else you want to add? Any other like thoughts that you had during the episode that you're like, I gotta get this out?
I mean, the main thing for me, it just shows from all 4 of us just how many games there were on the PlayStation, and you could easily get 100. You could get 100 people in a room and say, right, we need to get 20 games down. It would be never ending. I think at the time when the SNES Classic came out and the NES Classic, there was lots of podcasts and debates about what games would you include and what ones wouldn't you include. Mm-hmm. But there was always a consensus with those lists. The games on here are still great. Okay, you might replace one with another. Maybe you'd want Final Fantasy 4 over 6. So you have personal preferences, but you couldn't argue with those lists. Like for me, I prefer Super Street Fighter 2 over Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Mm-hmm. Personally, because you get 4 more characters.
Yeah.
But with this list, I just feel like, and it's very easy to do, and a lot of people are kind of getting very opinionated, and they kind of like have that sense of entitlement that this list there's too many question marks against it, and I do wonder who and which people made these choices. I would be really interested one day to read about it or hear about it, and for them to say what went on.
Yeah, that would be a very interesting article or documentary or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm kind of I guess my parting thought on this is that I'm very surprised that none of us included Tomb Raider, and I'm very happy about that. Because as much of a big symbol of the PS1 as Tomb Raider and Lara Croft were, they're really not good games.
Yeah.
And they really age poorly. But it is kind of surprising because they were so massive and they were so big for the PlayStation. So I'm still a little bit surprised. And to be fair, I would have included it, if we wanted to treat the PlayStation as a great representation of everything the console had to offer.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised that none of us included it, and mildly happy about it.
I think they got quite decent towards the end. I think Tomb Raider 3 was it was like a much more refined version of the original. But I just feel like
the original, no, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I recently tried to go back and play Tomb Raider, and as soon as I realised I forgot, but I couldn't use the analog stick. It was like, this is not going to go well. And it really didn't. Yeah. Really didn't. But the remake on the PlayStation 2 was excellent. But yeah, the original.
Yeah, it was. It really was. Yeah. Tomb Raider Anniversary was a very, very good remake.
Yeah.
Arnie, any parting thoughts there?
I think that what this whole conversation has sort of imparted upon me is that I'm concerned for the future of these sort of classic systems. I think that one thing that is clear is that it's Nintendo. There's something to be said about owning a lot of your major IPs and your big like tentpole titles. I think that Nintendo has shown that when you own a lot of your own IPs, you have a much easier time making a system like this work. But, you know, the jump up to $100, the fact that it's only 20 games, the fact that, you know, clearly, I think anybody would agree with this, these are not the best games that the PlayStation 1 had to offer. And there's several reasons for that, and they're understandable to a degree. But I think what it shows is that companies that are not Nintendo are going to have a much harder time making a system like this work than Nintendo would. Because I think Nintendo, obviously, their big franchises that people love, they own most of them. And so they, especially with their older systems, it's very easy for them to put up 10, 20, 30 games, you know, without having to dig too deep into their wallet. Whereas I think Sony, who with the PlayStation 1 had one of the things that made the PlayStation 1 stand out over the Nintendo 64 was the amazing third-party support that it had. But when you go back to a system like this, then maybe the third-party support isn't, you know, the best thing, because now you're having to shell out money to all these different people. So, you know, we'll see how it ends up doing when it finally comes out. But I think that it's concerning for other companies outside of Nintendo to want to attempt something like this in the future.
Yeah, and that's pretty much my thought as well. I just think it's ironic that, you know, back in the day, Sega and Nintendo were like, hey, you third party, you should be happy to publish games on our system.
Yeah. You
go and do your own thing, and then we'll do some QA, and everybody will be happy. Whereas Sony was like, here's what we'd like you to do. We're going to give you all the help we can. We're going to give you these really easy dev kits. We're going to give you frequent updates. We're going to send employees over to your company to help you produce these games for our system. We want you to be a part of our family.
Yeah.
And now that the Classic is being released, it's like, oh.
No, thank you.
And I think it speaks a lot to the perils of game preservation and the fact that a lot of these games may not be re-released in the future when we don't know who the license holders are anymore. Or you have to license Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and you have to negotiate with Shad Muska's estate. You know, that presents kind of a conundrum there. So I think it speaks to the need for more public domain laws that allow you to, you know, in the interest of art and preserving culture and history, that you need to make this subject to the public, and the public needs to have access to them, because otherwise we end up with the same situation as the early silent films, where a lot of them were lost. So I think it speaks as to the dire state of the video game preservation movement, and how many difficulties we will have in the future in trying to release these games again in the future.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we'll leave it at that then, if that works for you guys.
Works for me.
Yeah.
All right. Jeff, where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at G-Spot Gaming. You can also find me hanging around Utrecht. I like to frequent pubs, and I also have a job. So if you want to find me, I'm in Holland.
Arnie?
You can find me. I have a personal Instagram page that is long dead. At Welcome to the Game. It's welcome to the game. But you can mostly find me on the Region Free Gamers Instagram and Twitter. It's at Region Free Gamers on both. We're also on YouTube, so look for us on there. And as Paul said, power bomb that subscribe button through a table. And I think that's about it.
Yeah, Ozzy?
You can find me on Instagram at Shadow of the Collector with periods in between those words. And occasionally I post on Region Free Gamers, but not as usual as Arnie. But yeah, just definitely, you know, give a follow. Let's chat.
Cool. And you can find me on Instagram as well, Paul's_Game Room. As always, guys, again, thanks so much for listening. I think we have really cool listeners who interact with us quite a bit. And if you're new to the show, feel free to say hello. If you have ideas, if you have questions, pelt us. We love to hear it. And again, as always, rating and review on the Apple Podcasts app. That would be really helpful to us. And yeah, that's it for today. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
Pack up your stuff. I got a little surprise for you here. Check it out. What do you think about that? We got real-time, 3D, lush organic environments. How's that make you feel, buddy? Feel a little like your days are numbered?
I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
You're hurting my elbow.
Is that Italian?
No, Bandicoot is an Australian name.